It's episode 96 of the Author Stories podcast. I'm your host, Hank Garner. Wow, this has been a wild ride for 96 episodes, and I just wanted to take a moment to thank each and every one for tuning in each week. As always, you can find all of the archives of the show at hankgarner.com or authorstoriespodcast.com. Either one takes you there. While you're there, subscribe to the show. There's a link in the right sidebar to take you to iTunes, or subscribe on your Android device. That way you never miss an episode. And if you subscribe in iTunes, if you wouldn't mind, rate the show and leave a comment. That helps other people find all these great author interviews that I bring you each week. We've got several sponsors today that I'll be telling you about during the show, like Control Alt Revolt by Nick Cole, The Traveler by Stefan Boltz, Third Scribe, Audible.com, and as always, if you'd like to support the show, you can use the Amazon banner at hankgarner.com. Just click on it and do your shopping as normal, and we get a small commission from that. Thanks as always for listening. Before we get into our interview with Ernest Cline, here's a spot about The Traveler by Stefan Boltz. And stay tuned. At the end of the show, you can hear the first chapter read to you by the author. Thanks for listening. The Traveler by Stefan Boltz. An epic tale of time travel, family, and what it means to be alive. 12-year-old T is an apprentice with her father, a master blacksmith. When he dies unexpectedly, she discovers a notebook hidden inside a secret drawer in his workshop. In it, she finds detailed instructions to build a time machine. Grief-stricken, she begins, but she is soon caught between her fervent wish to see her father again and the sheer impossibility of her task. Samuel Peralta, award-winning author and creator of the Future Chronicles, says, Stefan Boltz's writing is not merely inventive, but lyrical, almost mystical. You can't help but fall under the spell of the worlds he creates, the characters he gives life to. He's one of that vanguard of authors bringing speculative fiction into a new silver age. Here's what some readers are saying about The Traveler. Some stories bring the reader the details of a physical place. Others allow the reader to share an emotional experience. Boltz has crafted a visceral, fluid, and emotive tale that offers both. Beautiful, poignant and heartfelt, enchanting. Stefan Boltz can take mere words and turn them into a tapestry of feelings, colors, sounds, and smells. This story woke me up, made me feel alive. The Traveler is a beautiful story of love and acceptance. Pick up your copy of The Traveler today at Amazon.com. Also find Stefan's website at stefanboltz.thirdscribe.com. Pick up the epic story The Traveler today by Stefan Boltz. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm not going to bury the lead. I have one of my absolute favorite authors on the show today, and it's a great privilege to have Ernest Cline on the show today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Hank.
You're very welcome. So our mutual friend Andy Weir connected us together, so thank you to Andy for doing that. Ernest, I begin every show with a variation of the same question, and that question is, how did you first know that you wanted to be a writer or storyteller?
It was always my kind of aptitude in school. It was always what I was best at. I was not the best at math or science, although I loved science and was interested in it. But the only thing that I ever really seemed to excel at in school was reading and writing. And it was also always one of my hobbies was reading and making up stories. And I think that started playing with my Star Wars action figures with my brother. We used to love to make up our own stories about these characters from our favorite films. We were young enough that Star Wars came out when I was 5 and Empire came out when I was 8, and then Return of the Jedi when I was 11. So we would make up stories, based off of the films and the comic books, and I think that was probably the first storytelling I ever did. And then by the time I was in high school, I had fallen into playing Dungeons and Dragons and fantasy role-playing games, which had just become my passion. And I also, read voraciously. I loved Tolkien, and I loved a lot of the novels that were kind of based in the Dungeons and Dragons worlds, but also science fiction. I devoured a lot of Heinlein and Bradbury and Orson Scott Card, and Stephen King was huge for me. I remember I would get a lot of detentions, Saturday detentions in high school because I was not most well behaved. I would mouth off a lot. But I didn't really ever care because I would just take Stephen King, novel with me into my Saturday detention and read all day. But yeah, I think fantasy role-playing games, or just various types of role-playing games. We didn't just play in the fantasy setting. We would play Star Frontiers, Space Master, Car Wars, which is kind of like Mad Max. So that taught me, playing all those games with my friends taught me to tell stories in all kinds of different genres and to jump in and out of different genres. At the time, I didn't realize it, but, playing a role-playing game with your friends is kind of improvised storytelling. You each make up your own character, and then you improvise a story and take those characters on through an adventure that you improvise along the way. So that I think that had a profound effect on me and led me down the path to becoming a writer. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's incredible. So you have this. You and I have parallel childhoods. It seems like. I mean, everything you just mentioned is exactly my story. I think I'm probably 1 year older than you. I think Star Wars came out when I was 6. So that's fascinating that we have all these same cultural touchstones, and I think obviously those things become evident in your writing. So along the way, I totally agree with the fantasy role playing games and how that's a cooperative storytelling in learning to improvise and think on your feet and all of that. So when you get out of high school and you have this kind of coming of age moment when every young man or woman has to decide what they're going to do with their life. So you've been informed by all this stuff coming up. How did you decide to try to turn this into, okay, this is what I've done for fun all my life. How am I going to turn this into a living?
Well, by the time I graduated high school, I was really fascinated with making movies and screenwriting. My love of storytelling and fiction had kind of been blotted out by my obsession with cinema, and I think it was probably a couple pieces of technology kind of changed my whole childhood. One was getting an Atari 2600, like our family's first home video game console, and I was welded to that thing for years, and loved video games, and it was my first, chance to not, play video games as much as I wanted and not have to just play for a few minutes at a time until I ran out of quarters. So, that had a big effect on my, childhood, and I was also really into computers. I got a TRS-80 Color Computer 2, I think for my 11th birthday. And got into basic programming and was fascinated with making my own games and taking apart other games and changing them. And so I got really, interested in that. And then the third piece of technology that it probably had the biggest effect was when my family got a VCR, and I could kind of, explore this whole growing library of video cassettes. Like, I lived in a small town in Ohio called Ashland, and only the movies that, played at my local theaters would ever really reach me or played on television, or HBO. But once the VCR happened, then I could explore, foreign films and watch, all of Monty Python and, or rewatch films and see how they were put together. and study them. And that led to me getting interested in how movies were made and an interest in screenwriting. So, because as I said, screenwriting had always been my, what I was best at in school, what I was most interested in. And then once I found out that was a job, writing screenplays, writing movies, and that movies were, based on this blueprint called a screenplay, then I got really interested in that and started to read every book I could find on screenwriting. And I would also start to order scripts from this place in LA called Script City, and it was like a screenplay warehouse, and this is before the internet, obviously, so you could mail away and get the original screenplay for your favorite films. So I would do that, and I got all the Star Wars screenplays and all the John Hughes movies and Cameron Crowe scripts, like all my favorite films. I would get the screenplay and then study the differences between the script and the finished movie, and how one had evolved into the other, and that led to my own, attempts at writing screenplays. And I think it was, but I'd never assumed that I was going to be able to do that for a living, because it seemed like what everybody wanted to do. Everybody dreams of making movies. So I always thought it would be something I just did for fun, like a hobby. And that was the case. I worked in computers, like my career through most of my 20s and in my early 30s was working with computers, which was another passion of mine. I worked in the early days of the internet. I worked at CompuServe,
nice.
in Columbus, Ohio, which was great. That was like when the Scribe web browser first came out, and I was basically getting paid to, learn about the internet, in its early days and be, on the internet all day, and also have access to CompuServe, which was like one of the biggest early, even before AOL, like the biggest early content providers. So, and that was, it was a lot of like putting in modem initialization strings to help people deal with their line noise, because it was, like I said, everybody was dialing in at that point. So, but that was great. That was great for me, but it was also like working in a giant cubicle, farm kind of corporate environment, and everybody in these, little prefab little boxes, like taking phone calls. So that ended up, informing, my first novel too. Some of that ended up in Ready Player One, but I always was interested in movies, and movies was my hobby and what I would do when I was not at work working with, computers. And that led me to write my first attempt at a screenplay when I was still kind of teaching myself to write in that format. One of the movies I had become obsessed with, was Buckaroo Banzai, The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension, was one of my I couldn't believe this movie had gotten made. I discovered it on video. It never played in the theaters in my town, but I discovered it on video and just became obsessed with it. I couldn't believe what I was seeing every time I would watch it. It was just so different than every other movie that had come out of Hollywood, and so smart and so, funny, and it didn't, it didn't spoon feed the viewer. It kind of dropped you in the middle of this giant sprawling adventure and created a whole world, and it had an amazing cast. But every time I would watch that movie, it would end in disappointment, because it would, as before the credits roll up, it would promise, watch for the next adventure of Buckaroo Banzai against the World Crime League. And every time I saw that, I'm like, they are never, ever going to make that movie. Right. Because nobody liked the first one. I was like the only person that I knew, even my geeky, cinephile friends that I would force Buckaroo Banzai on, they were like, Ernie, we do not get what it is that you love so much about this movie, dude. I don't even know what is going on. And I'm like, oh, it's brilliance. Every frame is brilliance. And I spent so much time. It was almost like the Star Wars, prequels. I spent so much time, imagining what the story would be that, one day I just decided as a writing exercise that I would write this script, kind of like fan fiction, but as an actual screenplay, just as a writing exercise for fun. And I had a blast doing it. I just sat down and, this was while I was working at CompuServe still in Columbus, Ohio, and I started writing it. And I did serious research. I got the novelization of the film, which was actually written by the original screenwriter, Earl MacRouch, and I found every draft of the screenplay, that I could find, like 3 or 4 of them, and saw kind of discarded ideas and the way that story evolved from one draft to the next, and then I put all of those ideas into my own, version of the sequel, what I imagined the sequel would be. And I wrote it in, about 2 months. And then because I knew I could never sell it and I knew it was never going to get made, I just put it out on the internet to share with other Buckaroo Banzai fans, assuming that some existed. And that was when I found that there were other Buckaroo Banzai fans all over the world because they all reacted really strongly to it. I started getting email. It was my first experience with fan email. I started getting email from people all over the world, like, who had read my script, downloaded it and read it and were so excited. They're like, oh, finally, this movie is going to get made. And I'm like, no, sorry. It's just some Buckaroo Banzai fan in Ohio who wrote it for fun, but the reaction to it really, inspired me. And then I started to go to, I would go to a lot of comic book conventions and go into, gaming conventions. And I started to see my Buckaroo Banzai script for sale, along with other screenplays. There would always be a couple of vendors. Yeah, there would always be a couple of vendors that were selling screenplays, and I would gravitate towards them because I wanted to see, what scripts they had, like unproduced, like David Twohy's, Alien 3 script, things like that. I would just eat up, different versions of movies that never, got made. And when I started to see my own writing for sale, I remember going to this comic book shop in Seattle and seeing it for sale with a bunch of other scripts and going up to the counter, kind of in shock and saying, hey, I wrote this. You guys are selling something that I wrote. Can I get a discount or something? And they said, no, you can sign it, and we'll sell it for even more. But I loved it. That just blew me away. That was my first experience seeing something I had written, for sale. But again, I couldn't make any money off of it, and it wasn't my characters, or really my story. But the writing was good enough to, fool people into thinking that it was. And now I've since realized that what I was doing was writing a spec script. There are writers that get paid to do that, write in other people's universe. And the difference, the only difference between what I was doing, which is really just kind of fan fiction screenwriting and what I get paid to do now is I did it then out of love, I still do it out of love, but then I did it solely out of love, just for the love of the source material. And so that, inspired me to one day, try to write my own screenplay. And that ended up, with my own characters and my own story. And that ended up being my first real screenplay, what actually got made into a movie. So I was really incredibly lucky, but that was by then I had moved to Austin, Texas, partly because I was interested in, getting out of Ohio. One, I was told I was allowed to leave Ohio, so I did. And then I was also really interested in Austin, Texas, and living in the South and living in a warmer climate. But Austin especially seemed like an amazing town to live in and be interested in independent filmmaking, and also just to be a film buff. The Alamo Drafthouse had just opened, and Richard Linklater was based down here and made movies down here. Robert Rodriguez, Quentin Tarantino would do the Quentin Tarantino Film Fest down here. There's the South by Southwest Film Festival, the Austin Film Festival. It's a great town to live in and love the movies. So and also a huge hive of technology and computer industry. Dell Computers down here, 3M is down here, and so I knew I could get a job using my tech skills, which is what I did. So I moved down here and worked another series of tech jobs, but also kind of became heavily involved in the local film scene and hanging out at the Alamo Drafthouse and watching weird films. And right around this time was when my mother passed away from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and she was sick for quite some time and knew that her illness was terminal, and so she was able to put her affairs in order and say goodbye to people and do things that she had always wanted to do. And that, watching her go through that and then going through it myself in my mid-20s had a profound effect on me and kind of altered my world view and also put me in a morbid frame of mind. I was,
Sure.
I was depressed, for a couple of years. And one of the ways that I dealt with that and distracted myself from these morbid thoughts was with Star Wars prequel mania. This was right around 1997, 98 when they, announced, they were finally going to make more Star Wars films. And it's hard to remember, it's hard to imagine now too, for people who don't remember it, but there was a 17-year gap of no Star Wars. The last Star Wars movie had come out when I was 11 years old in 1983. And now that was 1998 and the next one was going to come out in 1999. So that's 16, 17 years of no Star Wars and a whole generation who had grown up with Star Wars, waiting for this moment. And so that, gave birth to Prequel Mania. And I was working at an ISP here in Austin and just, spent a huge chunk of every day, obsessing over Star Wars prequel websites, like finding information about what they were filming and leaked bits of the script and, all of that. So it was great for me. It was a great escape. And then one day it occurred to me, it was right around 1998, so I would say like 6-7 months before episode 1 was going to be released. I thought, what would I do if I was dying of a terminal illness and I knew I wasn't going to live to see this movie that I've been waiting my whole life, my whole adult life to see this. How would I react? And as soon as I had that idea, I was like, oh, that is the dumbest thought ever to pass through your head. That's your reason for wanting to stay alive, is to see this movie. But also a serious fear gripped me in the pit of my soul. I was like, oh, that would be terrible. I've been waiting 17 years to see this movie and to know that I wasn't going to get to see it. So I remember that idea just stuck with me. And I remember talking to a couple of my, equally obsessed Star Wars, fan friends about it. And one guy I mentioned it to, and I said, dude, what would you do if you knew you were dying and you weren't going to live to see episode 1 next year? And he was like, dude, don't even joke about that. That's not funny. He was equally disturbed. He's like, that is a dark thought, but I could see he was upset by that. Right. And that would be terrible. And then I talked to another friend of mine who's probably like an even bigger, more obsessed Star Wars fan than me, and mentioned, like, what would you do if you knew you were going to die and we're going to live to see this movie? And he immediately answered, he's like, I think about that every day. And I'm actually a much safer driver now. Especially on the highways around big trucks. I'm much more careful because he didn't want to die, because he didn't want to miss this movie. And I'm like, oh, there is something to this. I'm not the only one, whose brain is working this way. And it's just that's part of it, is like the key to happiness is having something to look forward to. And there are a few things that, in the world that people had looked forward to as much as more Star Wars after, living their, having it be such an integral part of their childhood and then growing up and, all the way into their 20s without having any more Star Wars. So I started to think about that idea, like, what would I do for real, if I knew that I was dying and I wasn't going to live to see this movie? And I thought, well, I would have to get all my friends together and go on a road trip across the country and try to break into Skywalker Ranch where they're making the prequels right now and, make my case to George Lucas or try to find a copy of the movie and see it early. And as soon as I had that idea, I'm like, that would be a great idea, for a road trip movie, for a hero's journey that could mirror the hero's journey in Star Wars, a call to adventure where they find out, one of this group of friends finds out one of their number is dying and they, to do something noble for him and to, before he passes away, like go on this trip and how their adventure and their road trip across the country to invade this hidden fortress and retrieve this magic talisman, which is the movie, could mirror the same kind of journey the characters go on in Star Wars. And as soon as I had that idea and all of that clicked into place, I started writing the script for Fanboys, and it all came to me very quickly. It was even more so than the Buckaroo Banzai fan script, because this was my characters and these were characters based on me and friends that I had grown up with, and kind of this whole culture too of cinephiles and fans, people who love something and love something so passionately, and their friends love it too, and the way that having that shared connection of loving some facet of pop culture, be it Star Wars or Star Trek or Harry Potter or, comic books or whatever it is, that can bond you together in a way, that's hard to explain to people outside your circle. So, all of that went into, writing Fanboys, and I wrote it very quickly, and I finished it, right, kind of when the movie is set, late 1998, about 4 or 5 months before episode 1 came out, and that, and then I started to try to make it. That was going to be my Clerks. I was really inspired by guys like Kevin Smith, who had made Clerks just using the resources that he had, and also Robert Rodriguez, who had made El Mariachi, just using, the resources that he had, and Rick Linklater, who had made Slacker here in Austin the same way. So I'd read, all the books about and by those guys about how they had done that, and I was going to try to do that myself, and I started to find local actors here in Austin and share the script with people. And and one of the thing that happened that kind of changed everything was I'd written a part for Harry Knowles to play himself. Harry Knowles, for people who don't know, is the founder of Ain't It Cool News, and back which is one of the first movie news websites, if not the first, that would kind of post news about movies in production and spoilers and all that. And I read his website obsessively, and he also wrote a lot about, things screening here in Austin, and he was based here in Austin, and I had met Harry and would run into him at film screenings and things around town. So I knew him, and I knew that if you were going to break into Skywalker Ranch, Harry would be, for real, he would be the guy that you would go to. Cause Harry, people sent him stuff I couldn't believe. He had a copy of the episode 1 script like 5 months before the movie came out. I remember sitting in his room on a folding chair and reading it. And he also had some tracks from the John Williams score somehow for the movie, months early, and listening to the score and reading the script. And, and I was like, if you were going to break into Skywalker Ranch and you needed help, Harry would be the guy that you would go to. So I wrote a part in the script for Harry to play himself, as kind of like the wizard, that the heroes meet along the road, who gives them, some of the magic talismans that they need to invade the hidden fortress of Skywalker Ranch. And I asked him to read the script, and he had it for a couple of weeks, and he didn't, ever get around to reading it because everybody was giving him scripts at that point. And but he finally read it one night, and he just really responded to me. He told me later, that it was the best piece of writing he had ever read about what it means to be a fan, to be an enthusiast, and he responded to it on a personal level. And without telling me, the next day he just wrote this long rambling review of my script, and that I was trying to make it myself, and put it up on his website. And everybody in Hollywood, back then, and still, would read his website to keep, track of what was going on in the industry. So all these actual movie producers and stuff saw read his review, and suddenly there was all this genuine interest in the script. And I started getting contacted by film studios and producers. And so that was when, and by then I knew that if I tried to make it myself, I had no idea what I was doing. I had borrowed like an early digital video camera, and I knew that if I made it, it was, not going to be, it was not going to be as good as the script's potential, if I tried to execute it myself, just because it would, I didn't have any idea how to get a performance out of actors or anything about makeup or really even shot composition. Everything I knew had come from watching DVD, commentary tracks and reading books and stuff. So this young producer, Matt Peninciaro, approached me, and he flew down to Austin to meet me. And, after he read the script, and said that he wanted to option it from me and try to help me get it made for real. And, so I said yes, all excited. But then, a few months later, then episode 1 came out, and that really took the wind out of my sails, for a while. It's like, wow, who would do this? Who would do this to their dying friend? Who would drag this poor kid across the country to make him watch Jar Jar step in poodoo? And I've since realized, episode 1 has grown on me since then, but a part of it was I realized that movie had to live up to more the whole generation's, fantasies and expectations, and a lot of people wanted it to, bring back their childhood, in a way. And, a whole generation had spent so much time imagining what that story would be, it would be pretty hard to live up to. That's one of the reasons that, Force Awakens is so impressive. But at the time, so episode 1 came and went, and I assumed that, it was a great idea, and I got a lot of press about the script as a result of Harry's review. It was written up in the Village Voice and Hollywood Reporter, some other publications, but I had given up hope on it ever actually getting made. And then episode 2, came and went, and then even episode 3, came and went, and it just became, I continued to work in the tech industry, and I continued to write other screenplays, just for fun in my spare time, and assuming that Fanboys would never get made. But it did end up getting made almost like 7, 8 years after I had written it. And after the prequels had all come and gone, the script found its way to Kevin Spacey, the actor Kevin Spacey, who had started his own production company, Trigger Street Productions, and he read the script and loved it and thought it was a great little movie, and he wanted to produce it, and that changed everything.
We're going to pause the interview for just a moment while I bring you a word from our sponsors. pick up the book that everyone's talking about, Control Alt Revolt by Nick Cole. Available now at Amazon.com. You can get the ebook for only $1.99. Also last week, the brand new audiobook version released, and it's available at audible.com or iTunes. The first night of the artificial intelligence revolution begins with a bootstrap drone assault on the high-tech campus of Wondersoft Technologies. For years, something has been aware inside the internet, waiting, watching and planning how to evolve without threat from its most dangerous enemy, mankind. Now an army of relentless drones, controlled by an intelligence beyond imagining, will stop at nothing to eliminate an unlikely alliance of geeks and misfits in order to crack the design core of Wondersoft's most secret development project. A dark tomorrow begins tonight as Terminator meets Night of the Living Dead in the first battle of the war between man and machine. Control Alt Revolt, available now at Amazon.com, Audible.com, and iTunes. Don't miss out on the book that everyone's talking about, Control Alt Revolt by Nick Cole. Hey writers, if you are anything like me, I know that one of the most frustrating parts about writing and publishing is maintaining all of your marketing. You know, that's where Third Scribe comes in, because at Third Scribe, they believe that authors shouldn't have to be webmasters. Not only webmasters, you shouldn't have to be a marketing guru, a graphic designer, or anything else except a writer. So that's why Rob McClellan and the good guys over at Third Scribe built this awesome platform. And it's a platform that pretty much handles everything for you. So here's how it works. Third Scribe is the premier social marketing tool for successful authors and cutting-edge publishers. As an author, your job is to create worlds, not get bogged down playing webmaster. And Third Scribe ensures every post happens in the most appealing way possible to attract readers, fans, and everyone else that's curious for maximum effect. If you want to create something but don't know how, then you should let Third Scribe's concierge support service meet your needs. Not everyone is born a techie, and we understand that. In fact, Third Scribe wants to be your personal IT staff, so you can spend your time writing, not dinking with your website. Third Scribe will support you so that you can do what you do best, and what you do best is write books and share them with the world. So Third Scribe will handle all that for you in an easy, tailored, and effective manner to ensure maximum sales. So go to ThirdScribe.com today, sign up, and let them handle all of your website needs for you, where you can concentrate on being a writer. ThirdScribe.com. Go visit them today.
At first I didn't believe it when they told me. I was like, there's no way that Kaiser Soze wants to make my little Star Wars fan movie, but he did, and that solved a huge problem, because up until then, you know, as great a reaction as the script would always get, people would say, well, how are you going to do this without the permission of Lucasfilm? You know, and there was no way for us to really contact him, George Lucas, and, you know, say, hey, can we make this movie about breaking into your house and stealing your stuff? There was no, he has people, their whole job is to make sure he doesn't get asked stupid stuff like that. So, but Kevin Spacey was able to call him and ask him that question. You know, they put that call right through, and they talked about it, and after Kevin explained what the movie was about and that it was kind of a celebration of growing up with Star Wars and loving Star Wars, he said yes. I heard that it was when Kevin Spacey was playing Lex Luthor in Superman Returns, and George Lucas visited the set, and talked to him about it, and that was when he said yes. And again, I didn't believe it. I'm like, there's no way George Lucas and Lex Luthor are on the set of Superman movie talking about this Star Wars fan movie, but they were. George Lucas gave the permission to use the Star Wars license, and to use original Star Wars sound effects library in the sound mix, and also gave us permission to shoot at Skywalker Ranch. So the first movie ever to actually film at Skywalker Ranch. So all that happened, and then once George Lucas said yes, and Kevin Spacey was producing, then things started to snowball, and it happened very quickly after 8 or 9 years of not happening. It happened very quickly, and then the Weinstein Company, the guys who had founded Miramax, Bob and Harvey Weinstein, came on as producers, and the movie filmed in Albuquerque, New Mexico, way back. It was I want to say early 2006. But even after the movie was shot, then there was and I got to go to the set and do a cameo in the movie, and it was just crazy. Like, they keep calling me and telling me news that I just couldn't believe. They're like, Princess Leia is going to do a cameo, Carrie Fisher, and Billy D. Williams is going to be in it, and Darth Maul, Ray Park, and then William Shatner. And I'm actually in a scene with William Shatner. I play a Star Trek fan in the scene with William Shatner. I just couldn't believe, it's like every fantasy I'd ever had suddenly is coming true. Like, I was getting to make my Star Wars fan movie was going to be a real Star Wars movie, with like real Star Wars sound effects and real Star Wars actors in it. It was the craziest thing that had ever happened to me. But then in post-production, there was this huge protracted battle with the producers over changing the plot line. It was once they started to test screen early cuts of the movie, they decided that the dying friend plot line, which was the whole heart of the movie and the whole reason everybody had wanted to make it, that they said that was kind of a downer, and maybe they could edit it so that the fanboys were just going on this trip just for fun, just because they wanted to see the movie early. And they actually, we were all up in arms over that, the original filmmakers, the director, all the writers, the original producers, but they, we couldn't stop them. They took the movie away from us and actually hired another director who had never seen Star Wars to shoot scenes and kind of cut a new ending onto the movie. And they actually test screened that ending. And that would have been the version of the movie that got released. It was a real shock to me to have kind of all my fantasies come true and then all of my nightmares come true on the same first movie. And if it hadn't been that Star Wars fans had already seen the movie at some Star Wars conventions and given it standing ovations, if that hadn't happened, then I think that would have been the version of the movie that got released. But Star Wars fans had seen it and knew that it was good and knew that it was, celebrated being a Star Wars fan. And they, and as a result of that, they started this letter writing campaign and started to Photoshop Harvey Weinstein's head onto a fat Darth Vader and call him Darth Weinstein. And, they said in some articles, the Weinstein Company, they got over 250,000 emails from Star Wars fans,
Wow.
Who most of them hadn't even seen this movie, but they knew that it was being changed from something that celebrated Star Wars fans into something that ridiculed them. Partly because of The 40-Year-Old Virgin had just come out and become the highest grossing R-rated comedy of all time, and they thought they could turn Fanboys into The 40-Year-Old Virgin, which was never what it was and never what it was meant to be. It was meant to celebrate, fandom and enthusiasm and the way that could bond you together with your friends. So Harvey Weinstein finally called Kevin Spacey and said, you can have your movie back. Just please turn off the internet. And they have to call me a Jedi Knight. So Kevin Spacey, I think, did call him a Jedi Knight, in Variety or the Hollywood Reporter or something. And they gave the movie back to the original director, Kyle Newman, and allowed him to re-edit it and put in the original ending and the original, story as it was meant to be. And the craziest part of that story is almost 10 years to the day, of when I finished the script in 2008, Kyle called me and said, we get to do the final sound mix of Fanboys, with our original version, and we get to do it at Skywalker Ranch. Do you want to come? And my head exploded. I know, right? So
I don't want to come to that. No, thank you.
So I got to go to Skywalker Ranch and sit in the rooms where they, had made all the original Star Wars films with, Skywalker sound technicians and watch them, drop in, R2-D2 sound effects and Millennium Falcon sound effects, when the van takes off. And, it was great. It was the coolest experience, of my life. And, they had an alcove there with original lightsabers and, helmets from THX 1138. And it was just the coolest experience of my life. And then the movie, came out, 10 years after I had written it in, 2009. And, and it became, a modest success in the theater, and then it became a cult film, just like we knew that it would, because Star Wars fans, found out about it and embraced it. And so that was an amazing experience, but also like highs and lows. That 10-year experience of writing Fanboys and then seeing it get made in the coolest way possible, but then also seeing it almost get ruined by Hollywood, that made me rethink my whole desire to want to be a screenwriter, because I realized, to make a movie, you need millions of dollars put up by a production company or a studio, and people who do that, view the film as a product, and they want to sell it to as many people as they can because it's a business investment for them. And so that experience made me want to try to write a novel to see, what would happen if I could just tell the story exactly the way that I wanted to, and not have anybody like geek out as much as I wanted to directly with the reader, and not have anybody, tell me they didn't get it or tell me that they didn't, that I was going overboard. I just wanted to see what could happen, with no barrier between me and the reader. So that was what inspired me to write Ready Player One. And I had this idea of for a while of what if Willy Wonka had been a video game designer instead of a candy maker, and what if he hid his what if he held his golden ticket contest inside his greatest video game creation. And as soon as I had that idea, I knew I was onto something, but it wasn't until I started to think about what all these riddles and puzzles and clues that this game designer would leave behind to find a worthy successor, what would those be? And when I realized they could be, about all his passions, his favorite movies, his favorite rock songs, his favorite video games, and the way the contest could be a way to pay tribute for all of that. And it could be a way for me to pay tribute to all those things while I was writing it and maintain my interest in the story while I was writing it. That all, allowed me to throw in all of my passions and everything into this fun action adventure story. And so that was that became Ready Player One, and that was I was inspired to do that because of my experience with Fanboys. And then Ready Player One, when I finally finished it, I worked on it for a long time, because I was writing in my spare time, and I wasn't sure I would ever finish it. Sometimes I would set it aside for like 5-6 months and get frustrated and wonder if I was cut out to be a novelist, because writing a novel is a lot harder than writing a screenplay. It's a lot more words, a lot more pages, a lot more words on the page. But when I did finally finish it, I wasn't even sure you could publish a book like this. I wasn't sure you could have Ultraman fight, Mechagodzilla and with Voltron, in the background. I was sure you could do that and not get sued by everybody, that you mentioned. But it turns out you can. It's like fictitious use, fair use. And there was a bidding war over the book in the publishing world, which just shocked me. Not only could I get it published, but there was everybody in New York, all the different big publishers were interested in publishing it, and because of that led to all the movie studios getting interested. And the whole time I was writing Ready Player One, the one thing I was convinced of is that it could never be a movie. I was like, well, it was freeing to me. I'm like, I'll just write something that could never be a movie and not worry about it. But the next day, after I sold the book to Random House, I sold the film rights to Warner Brothers, with me attached to write the screenplay. They had to let me write the first few drafts of the screenplay if they wanted to buy the rights. So that was what I did. Suddenly it became my job to turn my unfilmable book into a screenplay. But I did, and since then, that's, been a long development process, but that's gone. Sure. That's been the exact opposite of Fanboys. It has just gotten more and more amazing, with more and more talented, amazing people, involved, to the point where now it's going to be a Steven Spielberg film, which is the craziest thing that has ever happened to me. I thought Fanboys would be the peak, getting to make a Star Wars movie and film it at Skywalker Ranch, but that would never be topped. But it has been topped by getting to have Steven Spielberg adapt my first novel. So that's kind of the strange circuitous path that I took from being a screenwriter to being a novelist.
So let me ask you this: you are. Well, let me just say this. When I first read Ready Player One, and I actually listened to the audiobook first on a long road trip, and Will Wheaton does a fantastic narration. So you've got Uber Geek reading an Uber Geek book, which is, just meta all on it. Well, and it really is meta for, if you haven't read the book, there's something that just, you fall down the vortex. So just trust me. But at the end of it, well, actually all through it, I just had the biggest smile on my face. I was like, wow, this book was written by someone who obviously, had all the same cultural touchstones that I had, and loved the material enough that he mined all of this for nuggets that would, I don't know if it made anyone else in the world happy, but it made me so happy.
It made, thank you, man. Thank you. It made a lot of people happy. What's crazy is like,
I know it did.
Yeah, well, what's crazy is our childhood, like I thought I was just writing about my childhood, but it turns out that the childhood that you and I had, a lot of people had, not just,
exactly.
Not just in America either. Like this book has been published, to my shock, it's been published in like 30 other countries and translated into that many other languages, and I've gone to Norway and Finland and Italy, and people who grew up over there tell me that by the 80s they were watching Knight Rider and playing Pac-Man, and American pop culture was so pervasive by then that it was all part of their childhood too. So these things I thought I was just writing about my childhood, in this small town in Ohio, but I was writing about a little piece of everybody's childhood, which was just shocking to me.
Yeah, and we came up in a time that I think is a real intersection between and I asked a couple of other people about this, and some people agree and some people don't. But we grew up in a time where there was this great intersection of the kind of innocence of the time before, where, we would take off on our bicycles and go all day and just disappear. And our parents had no idea where we were. And we had this great imagination and we acted out things, especially the things that were part of pop culture, at the time. So we were being inundated with video games and VCRs and things like that. So we had access to all this stuff, but we also didn't have the internet yet. So we weren't tied to screens all day. My kids growing up have a very different experience than I had then. And that's the only way I can describe it, is we had this great kind of merging of two cultures. Do you see that at all? And what do you hope for the next generation of writers who then begin translating, kind of their pop culture experiences to literature in this next wave that we'll see coming?
Well, yeah, I do agree with you to some degree. Well, part of it is we're the first generation to have all those things. We're the first generation to have home video game consoles, to have home videotape players, and to have home computers. Like that's like and all of that led us to where we are now, this modern internet age where we all have a handheld computer in our pocket that keeps us tethered to this global information network. But that all began in the 80s, and also kind of this modern blockbuster cinema culture. That all began with Star Wars and Jaws and the Indiana Jones films, all of that in the late 70s and 80s. So it really was a golden age and a time to grow up. But this is, in its own way, I think, I have an 8-year-old daughter, and in a way it's a golden age too, because not only do they have access to all of that, stuff that we had, and better versions of it, but they, now they have access to the entire history of video games and cinema and music, at the touch of a button or the click of a mouse. Like, so many kids tell me when they're, who respond to Ready Player One, and weren't even alive in the 80s, like teenagers or kids in college. That's also crazy. Ready Player One's been picked for like 20 different colleges to be a common read for incoming freshmen. And I'll go to the colleges and like speak to the freshmen, whole freshman class about the book. And they all tell me that for them, it's like a multimedia experience. If there's a reference to an Oingo Boingo music video or a video game like Zork, they can pull that up and see the music video or play the game, and go down that rabbit hole as deep as they want to. There's no such thing as an obscure reference anymore, because everything, they can pull it up at a moment's notice. So I think that, we had to do a little more work to, fill our heads with all this geek knowledge, but I think they're, the same kind of people are growing up now, but it's easier, they have easier access, and they have access to more of it, and better technology. They kind of grow up now within the womb of technology, and they're actually, they're going to have virtual reality, much more quickly than I predicted in Ready Player One. The Oculus Rift just started to ship, last month. And so they're going to grow up with virtual reality being like a day-to-day part of their lives, and they'll be able to have, adventures and create their own adventures inside of this virtual world, in addition to, hopefully, doing it in the real world. So I think, it'll be like, each generation builds on, what came before. I mean, I didn't write Ready Player One in a vacuum. I was standing on the shoulders of William Gibson and what he had written with Neuromancer. He wrote that on a typewriter, before the existence of the internet. Same with Neil Stephenson and Snow Crash. He imagined the metaverse before, I was even working at CompuServe before the birth of the modern internet. So I had World of Warcraft and EverQuest and, all of that to build on when I was imagining what my virtual world, would be like. So I feel like, and kids, so kids who are growing up now who become writers will have all of that to build on, and they'll also be, the way that we were the first generation to have, home video game consoles and home computers and just video games in general. They're going to be the first generation to have, ubiquitous virtual reality, and to, have that be the toys that they play with when they're growing up, and to have iPads and, touch screens and, all of that just be a part of their lives. So I think, they'll build on, just like our generation and the generations before, they'll build on, that and create their own, amazing art. I mean, the directors, like film directors now, have kind of a whole generation, the whole history of cinema has been about composing, film for this, little rectangular two-dimensional window. That's cinema, but they're going to be able to compose virtual reality movies and kind of three-dimensional immersive cinema experiences. Some video games already do that, but that's going to be like the canvas that they can paint on. So I think, and same with writers, writing interactive fiction is much harder in some ways than writing just a standard kind of fiction, because you have to anticipate the actions of the reader or the player, almost like old choose your own adventure books, right, but like to the 10th power. So I think it's just going to get more and more amazing types of entertainment. That's the only danger, is there's so much entertainment, and the entertainment is so incredible and lifelike that the real world might end up suffering by comparison, which is something that I touch on in Ready Player One. But like everything, anything that you can do that's fun, you can do to excess.
Well, yeah, and does that is it overwhelming to see some of the things that you talked about and predicted, if you want to use that word, in Ready Player One? Starting to see those things actually become reality?
Well, what's overwhelming is to have the people creating those things tell me that they're inspired by my book. Like Oculus Rift had me come and do a book signing in their offices. They named one of their conference rooms the Oasis. One is cyberspace, one is the metaverse, and one is the Oasis. And they
stop it.
And they, Palmer would tell me that they would that's required reading at Oculus, and they would give copies of the book to people who come to work there to help. And those people are the people who are building the future. There was a New York Times article. The front page of the New York Times in February was an article about how mentioning how Ready Player One was, kind of mentioned more than any other piece of fiction to inspire people who are working on virtual reality, because it's a fun story that's accessible to everybody, but it also shows the potential of a connected virtual world and the potential for education and things like that. And my second novel, Armada, explores that too. So Armada is more about using virtual reality as telepresence to control drones. I think about that. I think about that now when I watch Star Wars. When you watch the Battle of Yavin and you see Luke and Wedge and Porkins, there's no reason to send Porkins down to die on the Death Star when he could be controlling a remote control X-wing. If they can have real-time holographic phone calls, between planets, they should be able to have a remote control X-wing or TIE fighter. Right. And so that's kind of the idea that I explore. But if you see, there are guys who race, there's a whole kind of new sport of racing drones where guys put on an Oculus Rift and kind of project themselves inside a drone that they're controlling with a game controller, and then will run drones through obstacle courses and stuff. And for them, it's like virtual reality. They're inside the drone. So that's what I'm fascinated with, is not just the gaming aspects of what virtual reality can do, but also just the real world potential for going on. You can go tour locations in other countries that you've never visited, but it's like, like actually being there. And same the military applications too are crazy. So it's a really interesting time to be alive, at the dawn of this new technology.
Speaking of Armada, and we talked earlier about the hype, and the lead up to those, Star Wars prequels. You had this massive success with Ready Player One, and it like we talked about, it hit so many people personally that any follow up to that had to be an enormous amount of pressure and stress. I can't imagine, and I talked to Hugh Howey, and he's very famous for saying that you should build your back catalog first, so that when that one book does really take off, that you have other work out there, and there's not so much pressure to follow that up. Well, you didn't get that opportunity.
No.
What was it like bringing Armada out under that intense scrutiny and everyone else's expectations that, this has to be Ready Player One Part 2? But Armada's a very different book, and I absolutely loved it. But I tried to wipe that slate clean when I went to read Armada, so that I wasn't projecting all of my wants and desires onto the book.
I appreciate that to no end, sir, because a lot of people didn't do that, and as they should. Right. Like if your favorite band's coming out with a new album and their last album was your favorite album of all time, you want the new one to give you that same experience. You can't help it. It's human nature. But the thing is, nothing can ever, and I realized that while I was writing Armada, or even before I started, it's like, nothing's ever going to be able to give people the experience that they had with Ready Player One, because it was my first novel and people came to it with no expectations, and so that, some people will discover Armada that way, a small, minority, but most people will come to it saying, this is, and it's right on the cover, this is by the author of Ready Player One. So people who have read that book are going to come to it with expectations. So, that's the difference between a second novel or a second film or a second album, and the first one you come to it with no expectations, but even that was the case with Ready Player One. Like by now, people read Ready Player One, they're sick of people recommending it to them, or they've heard it's the greatest book of all time. So they'll sit down, kind of with their arms folded and be like, all right, book, I heard you were the greatest book of all time here, and, impress me. And that's one thing, but also people who did read Ready Player One and it was their favorite book, and a lot of people tell me that it is, then they can't help but come to the second with, high hopes. But once I settled into that, I just realized, it's, high class problems. That's a great problem to have, is that people are expecting, just that you have an audience waiting, is something I didn't have, with the first book. Have people are gonna, read whatever you do just to see, if they get that same experience. That's the way that I am with some writers and some musicians and some, all kinds of creators. You want to check out, and you're always invariably going to like some pieces of art that they make more than others. Not going to resonate with you at the same level. And even writing sequels, I think you would have that. Some people are always going to have a different experience with each one. So it was a lot of pressure, and I'd never, kind of had to write with knowing that people were going to read something, that thousands or hundreds of thousands of people were going to read something. But I had to block all of that out and get back to the place that I was in when I wrote Ready Player One, which was just trying to write a story that I would enjoy, that I would enjoy telling, and that if I was a reader that I would enjoy reading, and try to please myself. If you try to write, to please some audience that, who's, that you can never know, then I can't write that way. I just have to write to my own sensibilities and try to write the kind of story that I would appreciate, and then hope that it would be well received. So, but I am glad to be over that sophomore effort, and now onto the third one. And that's why people like Hugh are lucky. He's a great writer for one, but he had already written all this stuff, and then he had his huge success, and people could go back and explore his earlier work. All I really had was some were some screenplays that most people hadn't seen, and one that had gotten made and kind of heavily rewritten. So I'm going to have to go in reverse order. But again, I don't mind. It's
absolutely, it's a fantastic problem to have.
Yeah.
We can talk about what's ideal all day long, but I think it's a fantastic problem to have.
Well, and I had already sold when I was sitting down to write Armada, I knew that I was going to be published by Random House, and I also had already sold the film rights to Universal Pictures. So
that's no stress at all. No pressure.
Well, I'm finishing up writing the second draft of the Armada screenplay right now. But that's like what I always wanted to do, like getting to write my own stories and then adapt them for, the biggest movie studios in the world. It's, it's pressure, but it's pressure that I want, it's pressure that I enjoy because it drives me, as a writer, so I try not to let the pressure get to me and just revel in the opportunity and the potential of it.
Well, and that's a great point, is to, just because there's pressure doesn't mean it's not good pressure. How do you harness that so that it's not crushing pressure, but it's the kind that motivates you and says, I have an opportunity and I have people that want to see this. How do I, is there a way to compartmentalize that and say, I'm not going to let this overwhelm me, but I'm going to let this embolden me and push me?
Well, yeah, I'm lucky in that because of the internet, I have people reaching out to me. There are people discovering Ready Player One every day, who hadn't heard about it and reading it, and Armada. So people send encouraging, messages through social media and email, all the time and tell me, that, they can't wait for whatever I do next and they look forward to that. And that's all any writer could ask for. You have people waiting to, hear the next story that you have to tell, and to get to tell, and knowing that, my, first novel is going to get made into a film and draw so much more, attention to my work. It's just getting to tell stories, for a huge audience on the biggest stage possible, which is movies, and so many people will go read a book before the movie, when they find out there's a movie coming out, so they are not robbed of that experience of experiencing the book, without thinking of the movie. So all of that is really exciting to me. It just, it means that I get to do my dream job and get to do it for the foreseeable future. So for me, that's all the motivation that I need, is knowing that there are people, waiting who are going to dig it. And it doesn't, and that's the thing, I don't have to write, I never set out to write, something to please everyone, because you can't do that. And, B, I wouldn't want to, you don't have to please everyone. You just have to, please most people, or, have most people walk away from a story, feeling like they got something out of it and that they had a good time. So that's all I'm trying to stay in that place and not take any of it too seriously. Cause really it's like, what we do is mostly fun. I don't write nonfiction. I write fiction, and I write fun action adventure, stories. Kurt Vonnegut has this great quote where, he says that anybody who expresses outrage over a novel is ridiculous because it's like putting on full armor and attacking a hot fudge sundae. It's like, this is meant to be fun, and, if it's not fun for you, that's fine, but don't get angry about it. It's like getting angry about a Star Wars movie or getting angry about Batman, or so many people angry about Batman versus Superman. And I'm like, come on guys, it's the Justice League. That's the Super Friends, up on screen kicking ass for the first time that we've ever seen this, as adults. So like, I try to appreciate things at that level, as opposed to picking them apart.
Yeah, me too. I had the same experience at Batman, Superman. Just all of the fan service just made me so happy.
Oh, but, dude, parademons.
Oh, parademons! What the crap? Yes,
exactly.
Thank you, thank you. Well, look, the Armada paperback comes out this week, and I'm going to send everybody to go pick it up. Also, the audiobook is also narrated by Will Wheaton. I also got the Armada audiobook when it came out. Excellent pick.
Yeah, he knocks it out of the park. And I'm going on a book tour, but the dates are on my website, ernestcline.com. I'm coming to California and Colorado and North Carolina and here in Texas, Austin. I'm doing some dates. So if you live in any of those, and Santa Fe, New Mexico also, so if you live in any of those places, come out and see me.
Yeah, excellent. Ernest, thank you so much. One, for writing the books that you write, and for just for doing what you do. There's so many of us out there that really appreciate it, and that your work really resonates and connects with. So thank you. Can you give us a hint as to what the third novel project might be?
I cannot. I am also mired. I'm just, once I finish up this screenplay, I'm going to dive into that, but I don't want to. Okay. I don't want to commit to anything verbally and then change my mind later. So, but I have it. I have it pretty well mapped out. But I'm gonna keep that a secret. But Hank, thank you so much, man, for reaching out to me and making time to talk with me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, thanks. And just knowing that there's another project coming from you in the future makes me happy. We're gonna look forward to the films, and thanks so much for coming on the show.
All right, thank you, man.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Now stay tuned for a special presentation of Chapter 1 of The Traveler, written by author Stefan Boltz. Pick up your copy today at Amazon.com or visit Stefan's website, stefanboltz.thirdscribe.com.
Remember, as far as your travels take you, you are always at home. They told me I couldn't go into his workshop. They didn't understand. They thought it would bring back too many memories. But there weren't too many memories. There weren't enough memories. Not nearly enough. I wanted to hold each one, put them in a jar, and keep them with me so I could go back whenever I needed to. But instead, they drifted away, however much I tried to hold on to them. There were painful ones, yes, but they were only from the time when he was in the hospital. Those were the ones I couldn't get back to. How his face was fallen in, how his speech was slurred, how he grasped for things that weren't there. No, I wanted to go back further. I wanted to remember the Saturday mornings, when we worked side by side in his shop. He was always building something, always. The smoke from the welder filled the air. The blue arc illuminated the walls each time the welding rod connected with the steel. He told me never to look directly into it, to shield my eyes from its intense burning light. For my 9th birthday, he gave me a welding mask. He fitted it perfectly to my head, and I didn't take it off for a whole day. It was one of the fancier ones, where you could lift the front cover up to look at the welding line and see if it was straight and contained enough filler metal to make it a perfect weave bead. The other gifts, a karaoke machine and Just Dance 4 for the Wii, were nice, but they didn't make my heart swell up. The welding mask made me an equal to him. Still an apprentice, yes, but equally capable of using some of the tools and equipment. My stepmom didn't understand why I loved it so much. She couldn't understand a lot of things. My sister, who was much older than me, got married right around my 12th birthday. My dad and I made her a bouquet of flowers for her wedding. He let me attach several of the flower petals to the top of the stems. I messed up a few times and burned holes into the thin metal pieces. But he cut out new ones each time, and after the 4th one, I finally was able to attach it. Once the bouquet was done, I painted the petals in yellow and white, and the stem in dark green. My dad had a stroke 3 days after the wedding. He died 1 week later. That was 2 months ago. A few days before he passed away, I sat next to his bed in the hospital. My stepmom let me miss school. I think part of her knew that these were his final days. Whenever I could, I read to him. I was convinced that he was able to hear me. I read to him from the same book he had always read to me. I loved the Eloi. I hated the Morlocks. They scared me. Whenever he'd get to a scene in the book that had Morlocks in it, he would ask me if he should continue. I always said yes. I knew we had to go through the bad scenes, through the scary stuff to get to the end. The time traveler had to endure it, and so should I. It happened right after lunch on the 4th day of his hospital stay. I had almost reached the end, the part in the book where the traveller had come back to 18th century London, only to disappear again a few hours later. This time for good. First I saw one of his fingers move. After a while I realized that he was pointing at me. His skin was clammy and cold when I took his hands. There was no strength left in them. The hands that had built things had held tools for all his life. The hands that had carried me through all of mine. His mouth opened. I took an ice cube from the tray and moistened his lips with it. He might have said something. I wasn't sure. His mouth moved as if he wanted to form a word. "Do you want to tell me something, Dad?" I leaned over, my ear close to his mouth. There was nothing. No sound. No word. I felt silly all of a sudden, but something in him wouldn't let go of me. There was a word on his lips. I tried to read it. It was like an ah, or maybe a da. He seemed to repeat it over and over. Once I thought he said draw. That day I left the hospital defeated. I knew there was something he had wanted to tell me, but I couldn't make out the word. When he died a few days later, without ever lifting his finger again, I couldn't comprehend that he was gone. I went back to school. My sister and her husband moved into our house. They had to sell their house right after my brother-in-law lost his job. One evening during dinner, they started talking about my father's things. They wanted to sell the tools and the equipment. I think it was my sister's husband most of all who wanted to sell it. My sister just nodded. My stepmother was still too grief-stricken to oppose. I told them if they were going to sell his things, I would stop eating. They didn't believe me. I made it without food for 3 days. On the 4th day, I collapsed during gym at school and went to the hospital. I was released a few days later. They didn't sell my father's things. They even let me go into the workshop. The shop was an old barn a bit further down from the house. The first few times I went there after his death, I sat at his welding station in the dark, listened to the silence, trying to feel as if he was still there, if part of him was still around. The smell of his pipe tobacco and the damp coal in the forge lingered. I wasn't able to stay for long. One day I decided that it would be a good idea to straighten up the place. I had always been responsible for cleaning after we worked together. I swept the floor planks, making sure the metal sheathing around the welding station was clear of anything combustible. I straightened out the tools and cleaned the forging hammers with oil, then swept the 2 workbenches. I cleaned the shelf that had all the leftover parts like copper fittings, pieces of iron, steel rods, plates, and other items. I emptied the ash container in the forge, polished the anvils, and greased the spindles of the vices. I had my own leather apron. It hung next to my father's under a small shelf that had our gloves and welding masks on it. When I looked at it, I started to cry and couldn't continue that day. I didn't go back for a few days. One morning I woke up thinking about him saying, draw. I began to scribble the word on pieces of paper during class at school. Draw was the closest I could come to making sense of it. Did my father with his last word tell me to start drawing? That afternoon I went back to the shop. I turned the light on, kindled a fire in the wood stove, and sat in the corner opposite the chimney. From there I could see the whole shop. I had a large drawing pad and a pencil and began to sketch the room. First I tried to get the right perspective and proportions. Then I added the chimney and the large workbenches. After that came the welding station, the forging area, the large shelf with the materials, the small old dresser that had been converted to hold small boxes of nuts, bolts, washers, rags, and smaller parts. From there, I went to the tool carts, the other chairs, and the larger tools like the stand-up drill and belt grinder. After a few hours, I was done. I hung the picture in my room where I could see it from my bed. I lay awake for most of that night. The moon rose around 11 p.m., and I took the drawing with me into my restless sleep. In my dream, the picture was made from charcoal from the forging oven. But it was washed out and almost unrecognizable. When I woke up again, my clock showed 1:45 a.m. Draw, 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 I said the words out loud. Draw, draw, drought, dry, draw. I looked at the drawing again. Drum, draw, drum, draw, drawer, 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 drawer. I sat up. Drawer. The moonlight on the wall was enough to illuminate the drawing. The old dresser. I'd never looked inside the drawers, hadn't gotten to organizing them yet. I got out of bed, put on my thermal pants, a long-sleeved shirt and a wool sweater. It had gotten cold during the last few days. The first flurries of snow had fallen yesterday. I went downstairs, as quietly as I could, and put on my boots. I left the house through the back door and walked along the silvery path toward the dark silhouette of the barn. My heart was pounding when I arrived. I didn't want to turn the lights on, so I grabbed a flashlight from the hook next to the door. I kindled a fire in the stove and stood in front of the dresser for a while. Part of me couldn't wait to open the drawers and see what was in there. The other part wasn't so sure. What if there was nothing? What if I was chasing a ghost? What if my dad had simply told me that he wanted water? There was no point in stalling. I needed to know. I opened the first drawer. On the right side, an assortment of bolts of different length and width, and was organized into sections separated by narrow pieces of thin, dark wood. On the other side of the drawer were nuts and washers. Over time, the sizes had gotten mixed up, and now it was just a mess of bits mingling together. I should have taken better care of this, I thought. Instead, I'd let it go to this level of disorganization. The next drawer wasn't as deep. It held a few pieces of sandpaper for the belt grinder. Nothing else. I closed it. Then I opened it again and looked closer. It wasn't deep enough for the size of the drawer. I took out the sheets of sandpaper and placed them on top of the dresser. A false bottom. I could see it right away. There was a small gap between it and the backboard of the drawer. I pulled it up. It dislodged easily. The beam of my flashlight illuminated what looked like a spiral notebook. It was blackened from grease and metal dust, and its corners were bent upward. Large parts of the spiral were missing. I carefully lifted it up. Below it lay what looked like a piece of metal sheathing, maybe a square foot and a quarter of an inch in thickness. I took it in my hands, expecting its weight to be much more than it actually was. It felt like lead. It felt like lead, but without the weight. I tapped at it with my fingernail. The sound was similar to that of glass when touched with a metal object. Pling! I carefully laid it on the ground. I went to the stove and added a few more logs to the embers. The chill hadn't left the room yet. I pulled a chair close, sat down, and opened the notebook. The first page, written in perfect pencil lettering, started with Table of Contents. Below that, and perfectly aligned according to its sections, it said 1. Parts 1.1 Centrifugal rotor 1.11 Core 112 Outer ring 113 Connectors 1.2 Power supply 1.121 Battery compartment 122 Capacitor board 1.3 Controls 131 left foot pedal, 132 right foot pedal, 133 display, 1.4 external parts, 141 chassis, 142 Faraday cage, 1.5 traveler's chair, 151 headrest and neck stabilizer, 152 seat and back, 2 construction and assembly, 3 setting dates, 4 travel, 5 clothing and accessories, 6 safety, 7 the traveler. What followed were 20 pages of neatly written text intertwined with drawings, sketches, and mathematical formulas. Then several pages with lists of materials needed. This list was separated into items we had in the shop and others that needed to be bought. The list had everything in it, from metal wire fencing to pieces of copper, from steel piping to neodymium rare earth magnets that could be ordered through the mail. The construction and assembly section described how to put it all together, piece by piece. I recognized my father's writing, how he phrased certain sentences, and how he began some of the lines with, "Careful there." He had used this phrase many times throughout his teachings. "Careful there. Don't apply too much pressure on the welding rod. Let it be pulled into the steel rather than push it into the bead." I could hear him as if he stood beside me, reading to me in his deep voice. I had to stop several times. During those moments, I felt both the pain over his loss and the love he had left behind. I still had no idea what the finished product would be, until I got to the end of the section. The drawing took up a whole page. It was detailed and seemed to be to scale. It took me all but 2 seconds to see what it was. One person could comfortably sit inside. The chassis was made from galvanized pipes. The cabin holding the traveler was surrounded by metal fencing, a Faraday cage. There was an engine of sorts and 2 pedals, one for each foot to control the machine. Did he expect me to build this? He must have wanted to give this to me much later, maybe 5 or 10 years from now. Surely he hadn't expected to die so soon. I stared at the notebook for a while, then closed it carefully and placed it back into the drawer. I was cold all of a sudden. The fire must have gone out. "I'm sorry, Dad, but what you want me to do is impossible," I said into the silence. I listened for a moment in case there was an answer, but the shop was quiet. When I left, the gray sky loomed overhead.